mechanism in the lecture, and the reason why these
मैम
three
पीछे से
are
बहुत शोर आ रहा है।
combined. Hello?
मैम शोर
ठीक
बहुत आ
है?
रहा है पीछे से बैकग्राउंड।
एक मिनट. Now? Now is it still coming?
मैम आ रहा है बट हल्का हो गया।
So why these three organisms have been clubbed together is because these three give a similar presentation of hemorrhagic fever, and I hope everyone must have heard the name dengue, chikungunya, and Zika also. Zika was just few years back in news because of an outbreak, and it was suspected that it could be a potential bioterrorism agent. I have lecture one. Learning objective for this lecture is enumerate and classify the viruses which cause hemorrhagic fever and describe the morphology, the transmission mode, pathogenesis, virulence factor of these agents, and what are the clinical features, what are the complications, how do you diagnose them, and eventually what is the treatment available right now, and how do you prevent such infections. So viral hemorrhagic fevers are very big group of infections, very diverse group of infections, and the importance lies in that it is very much common and can escalate very easily to a state where the patient may die within a span of few days. So that's why these infections are very important in clinical settings, because you are going to see them, especially in seasons when these infections are prevalent, like dengue and all. When there's a specific seasons for these infections, because all of these are directly or indirectly transmitted by mosquitoes or some arthropod-borne arthropods, and that's why they also come under the category of arboviruses. So arboviruses, as the name suggests, these are the viruses which are transmitted from through arthropod-borne vectors. Okay, so viral hemorrhagic fevers, they refer to a group of illness that are caused by distinct family of virus. In general, viral hemorrhagic fever is described as a severe multi-system syndrome. So that is very important, that hemorrhagic word you may think that hemorrhage is the most important thing, but no, it is not. So hemorrhage is one of the characteristic presenting features, but it is usually a multi-system syndrome, and overall your vascular system is damaged and the body ability to regulate itself, the immune system also is impaired. So symptoms which are most commonly seen in such infection is hemorrhage. This bleeding is sometimes very much minor or may not be so obvious, okay, like rash in the skin or minor nosebleed, but sometimes it is in the internal organs, it can cause complications. So therefore a check on the blood parameters like platelet count and all is very much important. So bleeding itself is rarely life threatening. Some type of hemorrhagic fever viruses can cause mild illness, and many of these viruses can cause severe and life-threatening illness. I'm going to cover only these three. Let's keep the lecture focused on these three viruses. Otherwise, per se, viral hemorrhagic fever chapter is very big. So the viral hemorrhagic fever is caused by four distinct family of viruses: Arena viridae, Bunia, Phyllo, and Flavi. Now Arena and Bunia viridae, two groups, they are not so prevalent in our settings. Okay, we have dengue and chikungunya which belongs to Flaviviridae, and Filoviridae is something which encompasses your Ebola and all. So that is also an important virus family. Each of these families share a number of features. That number one, they are all RNA viruses. So RNA viruses, as currently the COVID pandemic is going on, you must have heard that RNA viruses mutate a lot. So that's why these viruses are difficult to control, and they are enveloped in a fatty lipid coating. So these viruses, if they are enveloped, they are susceptible to lipid solvents. Their survival is dependent on animal or insect host, which is the natural reservoir host, and these viruses are geographically restricted. So it is very rare for you to see infections which are prevalent in one area also be prevalent similar amount in another area. For example, dengue and yellow fever. The presentation is almost similar, but yellow fever, both of these are also transmitted by the same mosquito. But yellow fever is not seen in India. It is seen in Africa. So in India, because of prevalence of dengue fever, yellow fever virus is not able to make itself at home. So yellow fever virus gets a competition from dengue also. And also we have a very strict policy regarding vaccination for yellow fever virus in the airport and all, whoever is traveling from such countries. So you have to remember that these viruses are having certain geographic restrictions. These restrictions will not be possible if strict control is not there in aviation and in inter-country or continent transport. Okay, so humans are not the natural reservoir of these viruses. Humans are infected only when they come in contact with the host, infected host, and some of these viruses can be accidentally transmitted from the host to the human. So human cases usually present as outbreaks, and these outbreaks can be sporadic and irregular. Once the outbreak is there, you can identify, you can predict, because the number of cases will go on rising. But if the cases are very rarely one or two seen, then it is very difficult to diagnose. The also important thing is all these cases of infection, dengue, chikungunya, Zika, comes under notifiable diseases. So as soon as you identify or diagnose such case, you have to inform your seniors, your senior authority, so that such data can be sent to the national level, and from there policies are there to do a checking in that area to find out if the outbreak is going on and how to contain that. So most of these infections, they have no particular treatment. So RNA viruses, it's a very big problem that you don't have a specific treatment. It is like hit and trial. Right now in COVID, you try this, you try that. So there is no specific treatment. You can only give supportive therapy, but in some infections, there are certain drugs which are said to be useful, and there are some randomized control trials, some case reports which say, okay, giving this drug will not do any harm. It may not do any good, but it will not do any harm. So there are some drugs which can be given. In rare cases, other viral and bacterial infection can cause hemorrhagic fever also. So whenever you see a hemorrhagic fever presentation, there is a long list of infections you should keep in mind. But given your country's predominance, your epidemiology, you should always have a list from top to down, which is the most common and which is the least common. And one by one, you have to rule out each and every one. So these are pictures of some of the viruses family which cause this hemorrhagic fever. The arenavirus, Binnia virus, flavivirus, and filoviridae. So the most important here which are going to discuss is flaviviridae, and the first one which we discuss is chikungunya. Now, chikungunya fever, in the last 10 years, you must have heard the name. Some of you might have known someone who got infected, or you yourself got infected. I personally have been infected both by dengue and chikungunya in separate years. During my internship, I was infected with dengue, and when I was doing my residency, then I was infected with chikungunya. So the presentation of both is almost similar, but once you have the infection, the complication or the long-term effects of these two are different. Okay, so chikungunya is classified under re-emerging disease because it was prevalent very far back. Then again it came down. It came down so low that no one was suspecting it, and then all of a sudden the number of cases of chikungunya came to such a high level that it was thought that because of decrease in particular immunity in the population, this virus is able to cause infection in everyone. Okay, so it comes under re-emerging disease, and the characteristic feature are fever, acute fever, high grade fever with severe arthralgia. The patient joints, minor joints, small joints. So there is so much pain that the patient is always curled up and the patient is unable to get up. Even walking, the posture, the gait of the patient, it is very difficult for patient to do even minor work, even like going to the washroom. So the word chikungunya is derived from that only, from a terminology that means which bends up or gets folded, because you are in so much pain that your posture is stooped up, and it results because of severe joint pain in your pelvis, in your back, in your vertebra. So everything causes a lot of pain. So that is the main cause of morbidity in such patients. The fever is not as bad as the arthralgia. So the transmission in human is by Aedes mosquito, Aedes aegypti. This mosquito bites during the daytime, and very rarely it has been seen that chikungunya can be passed from mother to fetus. And the third most important factor is blood transfusion. Now, whenever you donate blood, that blood is always checked for a number of infections. Not everything can be checked, but the most predominant infections are checked, like HIV, hepatitis, dengue, malaria. Chikungunya is not checked usually, but in cases when there is transmission of such infection in your community and at that time blood transfusion is happening, a detailed history from the donor is expected, and also we can undertake such checking before you use that blood to give to some other person. Okay, so the transmission cycle, as you may have known, that there are two types of transmission cycles in majority of infections. There is one urban cycle, one sylvatic cycle. Now, why the difference? Because the type of host, environment, and vector changes in these two settings. The urban settings, you have the human host, which is very much available everywhere. The human serves as the reservoir during epidemic period. So from one human to another, this infection passes on via Aedes aegypti. So humans are predominantly available in urban cycle, and you have lots and lots of mosquitoes. These mosquitoes breed in certain places, and during daytime they'll bite a host which is infected, and it will transfer the infection to some another human which is not infected. So that is how the urban cycle is maintained. The sylvatic transmission usually occur in African forest, in which you have some primates, some animals which keep this infection as a reservoir, and from there it keeps on transferring its in the forest area only. Only when a human or a susceptible host from outside enters, they take this infection back to the urban cycle, and from there it causes a human outbreak. Clinical manifestation is very much similar in these two presentations. The incubation period is short. After acquiring the infection or a bite, within 5 days, around a week time, you start presenting. The most common presentation are fever and severe joint pain. The fever will start first, and then within a span of 1 or 2 days, you will have severe joint pain. The arthritis is typical polyarticular, migratory, and edematous. Now you have to remember this point. Otherwise, clinically, you have to this point will help you in clinical judgment if it is chikungunya or dengue. You cannot at the time of patient presentation wait for a laboratory finding to come to you. You have to see the patient, and as the presentation comes, you have to pick up some features which are particular of an infection and then diagnose. So arthritis here is polyarticular, multiple joints at one time, migratory, one joint, then another joint. The remaining original joint which was initially causing pain, it will go back to normal. So this joint to joint involvement will keep on going in the body, and the joint swelling may not be visible. The dependent part of the body, like your ankles, they may swell up. The wrist joint may swell up after a day's entire day has gone, and when you rest at the night, the next day in the morning, the patient will show that the joints have come back to normal. So predominantly small joints of wrist and ankle are the most commonly painful affected one. Other symptoms, just like any other viral illness, you have severe headache, muscle pain, tenosynovitis and skin rash. Now tenosynovitis can be there, but it is difficult to diagnose because you also have pain. The skin rash is characteristic in this also. So the patient will present fever. Patient will please mute yourself. Someone is not muted. The symptoms are confused with dengue, and you have to stop. Someone is not muted. Okay. So how do you differentiate is, and why do you need to differentiate? If you think about it, if the treatment does not matter and you just have to give symptomatic treatment, why do you need to differentiate? Because you need to report these, because these have to be, there are separate control policies of these viruses, and also the prognosis of both these infections are different. Chikungunya is less severe, less acute, and there are less hemorrhages involved as compared to dengue. Most patients which are infected with chikungunya recover within a week, except the joint pain, which may last for 2 to 3 months. And high risk groups like newborns, older patients, and all with comorbidities may have prolonged illness. How do you differentiate the two, chikungunya and dengue? Fever is common in both. Polyarthritis is not usually seen in dengue. In dengue, you see general malaise, weakness, but you do not see polyarthritis. Tenosynovitis is also not seen in dengue. The rash presents on the day of fever or on the next day of the fever in chikungunya, but in dengue it may take at least 3 to 4 days before presentation. So patient presents at the time, taking history and being specific is very important. Now myalgia is very common in dengue, but myalgia in chikungunya is there, but not at that much level as compared. Now when you come to blood parameters, dengue, you all know that platelet count goes down, but in dengue everything goes down. Leukopenia, thrombocytopenia, the entire blood count comes down. But in chikungunya, the platelet count remains in a normal range. There may be some dip because every viral infection, the platelets do come down. But in chikungunya, it does not come down below the lower limit. Okay. Then retroorbital pain is very characteristic of dengue. The patient will tell you, and that is one of the indications that it is dengue. And hypotension. Hypotension is because your vascularity inside is compromised because of infection and there is plasma leakage. So you get hypotension in such patients. So dengue hypotension is there, and that's why dengue shock syndrome is one of the complications you have to look out for. In chikungunya, it is possible but very rarely seen. And bleeding also, minor bleeding in dengue is much more common as compared to chikungunya. So, as regarding the epidemiology, chikungunya was first reported in Africa and subsequently it was introduced in Asia. There have been certain outbreaks in various countries. In India, the original outbreak was during 1963 to 73. Then it came down. It came down to such a low level that it was hardly diagnosed. So up till 2005, most part of the world except few sporadic areas didn't show any chikungunya, including India. Then in 2005, chikungunya re-emerged, and at that time in one of the reunion islands of Indian Ocean, almost 1/3 of the population of that country was involved. And finally from there it spilled over in India and other Southeastern Asian countries, and from India and Southeastern Asian countries it went to America and Europe. At present we are seeing that chikungunya is endemic. We are still having every year infections. There are no big outbreaks coming on, but yes, chikungunya every year we are seeing. And there are certain areas in India, certain states which show a predominant higher case numbers as compared to other. So mostly the southern states of India are showing higher number of cases. Okay. So Karnataka is the one state where maximum number of cases are seen. Now coming on to the pathogenesis and the type of virus. Chikungunya has 3 type of genotypes. Now whenever you report such infections, as we are seeing in COVID, different type of genotypes, strain types, everything has its own significance. If one type of genotype is, that means the type usually does not establish itself, and the prognosis also depend, and the type of infection, the severity also depends on the type of genotype present. Right now in COVID, for example, you have a certain double mutant which is being circulated, and you are finding it to be much more harmful. Same goes for any other type of RNA infection. So in India, before 1973, Asian genotype was there, but afterwards the genotype distribution is changed. So human cycle in Asia and forest cycle in Africa, the genotype cycle has changed. So the reason which was ascertained that why after such a long time chikungunya re-emerged was because this virus, RNA virus, got a mutation, and this mutation was such a boost for this virus that it was able to cause infection in a widespread population in a very short span of time. The advantage for this virus was because it was not there for so many years, the body itself did not have any specific immunity for that virus or related virus. Okay, so that's why it was able to establish. So two important point were, number one, there was mutation. Number two, the immunity has waned or it was not present. And third, there was a new vector. So the mutation led to shift in the vector preference. This vector, which was now most commonly causing this transmission or was more adapt, was Aedes albopictus. Now Aedes albopictus is a very ferocious biter. It goes on biting and biting and biting. Okay, and the chances it will transmit a decent amount to cause infection is much more. Aedes aegypti is also a good biter, but as compared to albopictus, it is milder. Okay, you have much more severe infection nowadays. Now, as per certain guidelines, you have case definitions, and these case definition helps you during outbreak or during initiation of outbreak where you can suspect, and once you have to report to your authorities that we are suspecting such infections, a general outbreak investigation should be done. These factors should be met. Okay, so clinical criteria, that acute onset of fever, arthralgia, arthritis, with or without skin rash, and the person is residing or left an epidemic area 15 days prior to onset of symptoms. So these are some definition points which should be met if you have to consider reporting such infections to higher authorities, so that outbreak investigation can be started. Okay. So same way you have probable case, confirmed case, and definitions, and all these factors we will discuss one by one. This infection, just like any other arboviruses, they for every viruses you have a certain set of diagnostic criteria. Number one is just example of it. In case of chikungunya, because it is systemic infection, you send blood. Okay, so in blood you can try doing what? You can try doing antigen testing. You can try doing virus isolation. You can check for serum antibody and antigen. You can also check for presence of this viral RNA by PCR. So now, because of COVID, we are such nicely equipped with RT-PCR and everything. We are much more versed with it. Viral isolation is not easy, but viral PCR are new. So in laboratory diagnosis, the isolation part is not done because it is very tedious, very difficult, and only certain labs are equipped. And also it is very unsafe because you are isolating this virus. It can spread if not properly contained. PCR is best method to diagnose, but there are some issues because such infections, even asymptomatic, can give RT-PCR positive even after it has subsided. Now, serum antibody detection will not help you for diagnosis. It will help retrospective and for seroprevalence studies. Okay? IgM appears after 4 days of infection and it may last for 3 months. So you cannot ascertain if the infection currently which is happening is because of chikungunya or there is some other infection. IgG appears very late and it lasts for years. So only IgM detection can help you if you choose to diagnose with it. And you have to check any increase in the titer of that IgM. Otherwise, you cannot pinpoint that this was the infection. Now, MAC ELISA is a characteristic feature which will help you in identifying IgM antibody. The MAC ELISA we will discuss. I think we have also discussed in some of the antigen antibody lectures. It is the best format. It is done. It takes around 3 to 4 hours. And you can put 96 samples together, and the sensitivity and specificity is very good. The problem with MAC ELISA is that it will not give you an instant result as compared to the rapid diagnostic kits. Okay. The MAC ELISA is being provided by Government of India through National Institute of Virology. There are multiple rapid kits available to check this chikungunya also. Now, molecular method, you will go for certain specific genes for this chikungunya, like NSP1 and NSP4. So these are just names, you don't need to remember. Just remember that for reverse transcriptase PCR, you have some specific genes which are identified in blood. Okay. All these markers, biological markers, IL-6, ferritin and all, these help in prognosing the level of infection and to ascertain what type of treatment or setup the patient requires. Okay. So the treatment here is supportive measure. There are no specific antiviral and there is no vaccine available. There are certain vaccine trials which are going on, but still nothing conclusive has come. Okay. The next virus which is important and many of you must have read about is the dengue virus. It's the most common arbovirus which is found in India. It has 4 serotypes, dengue 1 to dengue 4, and recently a 5th serotype. Now this is very important for you guys to remember because in some of the books still only 4 serotypes are mentioned. The 5th serotype was discovered in 2013 from Bangkok. There have been suspicion that in India the dengue serotype 5 has come, but it is still under debate. The vector again here is Aedes aegypti. It can also be infected, transmitted by Aedes albopictus. And again, this mosquito bites during the daytime. And Aedes aegypti is said to be a nervous feeder. It bites repeatedly. So every time a vector bites you, the chances of transmission increases. So if same mosquito bites you 10 times, the chances that they will transmit the infection is much more. And these vectors are prevalent in domestic areas and they are efficient vectors. Albopictus in comparison is available in urban areas, but in periphery urban areas where the forest and the urban areas merge. So wherever there is development going on, new construction going on, there is damage to these forest areas. From there, the Aedes albopictus you can identify. But as compared to aegypti, it is much more aggressive. It can complete a blood meal in one go, hence the transmission cycle is very efficient. For aegypti and other vectors, they do not get complete meal in one bite. They'll go bite once and they will again bite. So they are taking small meal, but Albopictus takes a complete meal at one go, and that's why it is able to adhere to the host more and transmit more. ADs get infected only by feeding on viremic patients. Okay, so once a person is infected, you have to break the cycle. You cannot allow that patient to transmit more. So how do you prevent it? Whenever such infection is identified in a person, you have to make sure that the person is not exposed. They are wearing full length clothes, and they are sleeping or staying inside a net. Because if you don't prevent further mosquitoes to bite that person and transmit, this cycle will go on. The extrinsic incubation period of 8 to 10 days is needed. So why is it so important in preventive basis? That once a person is infected, the presentation starts after 5 days of infection. Okay, but the mosquito can bite you from day 1 to day any long. You have to prevent these 8 to 10 days of infection and the person from getting bitten by mosquitoes. Okay, once infected, the mosquito remains infected for life, and therefore they can someone is not muted. So the Aedes can pass on the dengue virus to its offspring. That's why how it is maintained in between the epidemics, in between the outbreaks. So during this season, the Aedes has caused dengue virus to be present in host. But once the dengue cases come down, why does dengue again occur after few months or after a year? Because the Aedes mosquito, it passes on the virus to its eggs, and this trans-ovarian transmission keeps this virus in a circulation, which again during the next season, when the immunity is less, when the chances of mosquito population to increase is more, then at that time again the population will have this infection. The transmission cycle from man to Aedes is the main cycle, and no other animal is usually. Primary dengue infection occurs when there is a person which is infected with dengue virus for the first time with one serotype. Remember, there are now 5 serotypes. Months to year later, a more severe form of dengue illness may appear, which is called as secondary dengue infection, due to infection with another second serotype, which is different from the first serotype. Now, always remember that in dengue, you have a different type of secondary infection. Anywhere else, whenever you get first infection the second time, because of your immunity, you are prevented. But in dengue, it is not so. Once you get an infection, if you again get an infection, especially from another type of serotype, the chances you have more complication is high. So a person who had dengue should always take precaution never to contract dengue again, because they will have much severe infection the second time. The reason for that is antibody response, the type of antibody response against dengue virus. Okay, infection with this virus start production of both type of antibodies, neutralizing antibodies and non-neutralizing antibodies. The neutralizing antibodies are good. They are good for us. They are protective. Such antibodies are produced against the type of infection, this type of serotype, which is there right now. Okay, and these are for lifelong. And these are also for other type of serotypes. Hence, neutralizing antibody are protective. But cross protection for other type of serotypes will go down after few months. The second type of antibodies, which are non-neutralizing antibodies, are heterotypic in nature, and they are the ones which are produced against other serotypes but not against the infective serotypes. So you have to remember that neutralizing are the one which will protect from the infection which is present at that time, and non-neutralizing will not prevent from the infection which is present for this time but for any other infection. Such antibodies which are produced after first serotype infection can bind to the second serotype, but because they are non-neutralizing, the second they will protect the second type which are non-neutralizing will protect the second serotype which you may get in the future from elimination from the immune system. Okay, so that's why these non-neutralizing antibodies will help in increasing the infection next time, because they will mask the second serotype, the second infection from the host system. So it protects the host immune system by inhibiting the bystander B cell activation against the second serotype. You have to just remember this concept very nicely, because otherwise it will be difficult to understand. Just remember that the first serotype which was there in the first infection is protected by neutralizing antibodies, and any other antibody at that time which was formed is useless at that time. But whenever you get a second infection, second time with a new serotype, this new serotypes ideally should be detected by your immune system. But because this second serotype was covered with these non-neutralizing antibodies, they become invisible to your immune system. And because they are invisible to your immune system, they are able to attack your body much more in a much severe way, and your body cannot identify and cover them up, cannot kill them up. Okay, so this entire concept is called as ADE, antibody dependent enhancement. The antibody which was formed as first infection causes enhancement the second time, and the severity of secondary dengue, that's why it's much more. So amongst all the serotype combination, the most deadly combination which is seen is that first infection caused by serotype 1 and second infection caused by serotype 2. So this combination is the most deadly. You can have any type of combination, but anyone who got infected with serotype 1 at the first time should be most vigilant, because if they get serotype 2, their situation will go bad. So this is just a table showing you the clinical features and how do you differentiate a mild dengue with severe dengue. Okay, so these are all taught to you in your medical medicine, internal medicine also. You will see this classification everywhere. So dengue, the warning signs may or may not be there. Without warning sign, the patient can be managed at home. The criteria for probable dengue is that the person is living in endemic area, they have fever, they have associated nausea, vomiting, rash, there are pains, myalgia. Now tourniquet test is positive. Tourniquet test is when you bind a tourniquet around your arm and within a span of time you see PTK forming. Okay, I'm not going into specifics, but yes, that is the gist of this tourniquet test. And then you have leukopenia, laboratory confirmation by any other method, and what are the warning signs, so that the patient should be told that whenever you see these warning signs, you have to report to the hospital. Patient presents with abdominal pain or tenderness that can indicate some internal bleeding, persistent vomiting, clinical fluid accumulation, mucosal bleed, any lethargy and restlessness which is not normal or which is much more than expected. You have an enlarged liver. There is increase in the HCT concurrent with rapid decrease in platelet count. So HCT is hematocrit, and there is concurrent decrease in platelet count. Usually in dengue, whenever we talk, we think about there is low platelet count. But what is much more important is the hematocrit. Okay, so hematocrit is much better indicator of the condition of the patient as compared to platelet count. Okay. Criteria for severe dengue is there is either severe plasma leakage, there is severe bleeding, or there is some severe involvement of any organ. So what are the factors which will determine the outcome? I have a lecture I have a lecture going on. So the importance is that if you have a type 2 infection, it is considered to be dangerous. Or if you have a history of type 1 and now you have type 2, then you have to be much more vigilant. All age groups are infected, but it is usually considered that children with less than 12 years of age, they are much more common to present with hemorrhagic features and shock. Dengue is endemic in more than 100 countries and it is one of the most important infection causing death worldwide. Uh, there are 50 million dengue cases every year worldwide, so it is a very big concern. In India, it is prevalent in both in urban states as well as in rural areas. The epidemiology I'm not going to discuss, but yes, serotype prevalence is variable among season and places, but it is usually seen that dengue 1 is the most prevalent and the next one is dengue 2. So again, it is these two only which are most probably seen, and dengue 5 has not been reported yet. The lab diagnosis includes, as before in chikungunya, you take blood sample from the patient and you can either check for antigen, you can check for antibody, you can check for PCR, isolation, and where case it has to be done by SAS to be able to know about these serotypes. So NS1 antigen must have heard that NS1 antigen has to be done. So there are two formats available. You can either do in direct these small kits which are rapid bedside test, and then you have the ELISA. ELISA is much more efficient, but rapid kits are much more clinician friendly. It gives you rapid diagnosis. Okay. So NS1 detection has to be done within first 5 days of fever. Anything beyond NS first 5 days, if you try to check for NS1, it may come, but the sensitivity decreases after 5 days because this antigen by that time would be bound by the antibody. So detecting this antigen may not be possible. Okay. So you within 5 days of fever, NS1 antigen should be done. After 5 days, you should go for IgM antibody. Okay. Now this NS1 antigen is very important because it will help you differentiate between other type of flavivirus also, and this NS1 antigen can be used for different type of serotypes. But right now we don't have different type of serotype kits available in the market. Antibody detection can be after primary infection or secondary infection. So usually after primary infection, the antibody rise is slow, but during secondary infection, the antibody rise is fast. So past infection antibody can be detected even after many years in the absence of symptoms. So antibody detection should always be considered only if currently person is infected for diagnostic purposes. For any other epidemiological purposes, you can always check so as to see what your population is protected. So again, you have the MAC ELISA. The kits are provided by NIV Pune, and it is a very good sensitive test which we are also performing in our lab. And the problem with this is that this kit has some cross reactivity with other type of flaviviruses. So 100% you cannot say that the positive results are because of dengue only. It could be because of any other viral infection. So other than that, you have the heme agglutination inhibition test, complement fixation test. We hardly do these tests right now for diagnostic purposes, but we do show you in your practical classes what are all these tests, because you need to know at least a basic about them, but diagnostically you usually do not use this test. Now neutralization tests like plaque reduction, neutralization, microneutralization are important for serotype detection. As I've said, the person had serotype 1, had serotype 2. Now, how will you identify that? The person will not know. They will just do a rapid kit and they will not know. So, for that, you need to do all these tests. easy. It has to be done in a specialized laboratory with a specialized setup, so the virus is not propagated or is not released outside. Okay. So genotype detection, which we were talking about, each serotype has multiple genotypes, and these genotypes are prevalent in different areas. So we were talking about dengue 1 to 5, which were serotypes. Now we are talking about genotypes. There are 13 genotypes, and these genotypes again, they have different areas, different prognosis, different presentations, they have different severity. So the lineages of these genotypes are restricted to certain geographic areas and not required for diagnosis, but yes, for your epidemiology and for your outbreak investigation controls, all these are important. There is no specific viral therapy, antiviral therapy. Most of the therapy is to prevent the symptoms, to prevent the rise of temperature. It is said that every time you get a higher fever, you would develop fever in dengue, the platelet count goes down, because after every fever spike, your body will cause a rapid destruction of your RBCs, and your cytokine storm will be there, which will cause the platelets to get affected. Okay, so that's why you need to prevent the rise of fever. Fever spikes you should control. And then again, the patient has so much metabolic disturbances, you have plasma leakage, you have to control all that. Now the fascinating thing or the new thing about dengue is the vaccine. A vaccine has been prepared and has gone under trial in one of the African areas in countries, and it was found to be in a moderate efficacy. And that's why this vaccine is a promising vaccine, as you have seen in this presentation, that it is a global issue. This dengue is a global issue. So if a vaccine is available, which even is moderately effective, can prevent a lot of deaths. Now the problem is such vaccine efficacy is short-lived. So a program to give this vaccine every year to a very big population is difficult and costly. Therefore, such vaccines should be given with a certain, I think, it should be given in a certain way, so that most, what do you say, risky group, which are the most at risk, should be prevented. Okay, and then you have the general control measures dependent on the type of vector. Here you have ADs. So for ADs, you have specific vector control measures. You should prevent transmission cycle. You should prevent, you should ensure that the transmission cycle is broken. So regarding dengue vaccine, it's a chimeric yellow fever and dengue vaccine, and it was licensed to be used in human in 2015. So a lot of years have gone by, but still it is not so prevalently used. It's a live attenuated tetravalent dengue vaccine. So all the 4 serotypes are there, and the name is of this vaccine, commercial name is Dengue Vaxia, and produced by Sanofi Pasteur. It's a live attenuated yellow fever virus vaccine vector, which is used, and in this virus vector you have added the dengue genes, some of the dengue genes by recombinant technology. And the age group which is given this vaccine is 9 years to 45 years of age group. There are 3 injections, again a problem, because adherence, compliance to 3 injections at 6-month interval is very, very difficult. Single dose vaccines are the most compliant one, but if you have to give 3 injections, the patient compliance decreases. Okay, so as another vaccines, the contraindications are if you are allergic to any of the component. Because it's a live attenuated vaccine, you cannot give it to immunodeficient people. Pregnant and breastfeeding women are also not included because they can transmit the infection to the babies. So it was found that efficacy was around 80%, and they were able to prevent lots of. The vaccine has been recommended by the WHO to be given in high burden countries where the is 60% in the population. So currently this vaccine is being provided in Mexico and all areas, but in India it has not been approved. So this was about dengue virus. There's lots of more stuff for dengue virus, depending on its structure, its genes, the sequence of genes available. But all that you can read from your books, and you can ask me afterwards. Not much to be marked up there, but yes, these are the most common presentation. Now the third group of virus which we are going to discuss is the Zika virus. It's a single-stranded RNA virus. It belongs to Flaviviridae again. And the difference is that monkeys are the reservoir here. The original place where it was discovered was Zika forest, therefore the name Zika in Uganda. And it is an arbovirus transmitted by mosquito. Again, the vector is same, Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus. The mother-to-child transmission is the most important point why it was so much in news, because it was seen that it is transmitted in the first trimester and led to a lot of problems in the babies. So sexual transmission, again, in dengue and chikungunya, sexual transmission was not detected, but here in Zika, it was seen that sexual transmission was documented, and therefore the chances of such viruses to be remnant or to be reserved or to be there in population in a low frequency, and again can be seen at a higher count later. So that was a new thing which was found out in this Zika virus. So this is the timeline when it started in 1947 to the latest. In 2013 and 14, we will just discuss this, that outbreak was seen in 4 group of Pacific islands, and then there it was seen in 2015, Brazil notified that a febrile illness with skin rash was seen, and then onwards a lot of cases came into picture, 7,000 cases, and these were mild cases. There was no death. There was, at this time, Zika was not suspected, and no specific test for Zika was carried out. Only that there are few cases, 7,000 cases of fever with skin rash is suspected. But in 2016, WHO declared that association of Zika with clusters of microcephaly. The babies born to such infected women were having small skull. They were having neurological disorders, and that's why it was considered to be a public health emergency of international concern. It was declared as public health emergency of international concern, and this is the first step to call a infection as a pandemic. It is just before that this terminology is given. So the pathogenesis of these infections is that once it is this mosquito is biting you, the virus is deposited in the skin. From there, it will go to various cells in the body, and these cells will start having RNA multiplication. The Zika particles will be formed, and these active viral particles will be released, and whenever they are released, the host cells will be damaged. Once they are released in the body, your body will detect them and they will produce immune response. This immune response will kill the virus, but if this immune response is not contained, it will damage your body. Okay. Again, the mode of transmission, the sylvatic cycle and the urban cycle. So, because you have the sexual route documented, it was the advices were given, the guidelines were made that every person who is having this infection should defer from having sexual intercourse, unprotected sexual intercourse, and also semen donation from such patient was withheld. From mother to child, because such infection was suspected at that time, RNA samples or samples from amniotic fluid, blood and tissue sample from such patients and from such babies were taken, and they were identified if they had the chances of microcephaly. And because these are through blood, so blood donation was also deferred in such patient if they had history of or suspected case. The clinical features included incubation period. So even after exposure, you may present symptoms after 2 weeks also. So long incubation period was seen. The viremia was seen from few days to 1 week, and it was seen that Zika virus was present in urine and semen for longer times. About 80% of the people who were infected were asymptomatic. So that was a problematic thing, because for every person infected and symptomatic, you had lots of people which were asymptomatic, and thus the cycle of infection was going on undetected. Mild symptoms were presented just like any other viral illness or fever. You have fever, rash and arthralgia, and sometimes non-purulent conjunctivitis. The fever lasted in mild symptomatic cases for up to a week, and severe disease which required hospitalization was very rarely seen. Fatalities were also low, but it was reported that Guillain-Barré syndrome was seen in some of the patients, and the alarming was the congenital infections which were associated. So per se, Zika virus was not causing problems to the host. It was causing problems in the unborn child, and the entire population or the subsequent generation to come was affected. That's why this public health concern was raised. An infant was diagnosed with microcephaly in area with endemic Zika prevalence. At that time, was supposed to get tested and was supposed to inform the authorities that they are having microcephaly case, so that it can be at a time checked for a long run. So these are the definitions of case, probable and confirmed. The diagnostic method of Zika virus was that these samples, any sample from the patient suspected of this virus can be taken, and this has to undergo nucleic acid testing, that is the PCR. And the PCR was said to be effective only if the sample was taken within 7 days of onset of symptoms. Now serology was again done, and it was seen that a patient with onset of symptom more than 7 days was a good candidate to doing this IgM detection. Always it was preferred that serum sample in pair, like one today and one 2 weeks later, is the best method to diagnose or give a credibility to the result that IgM detection has risen or not. Record of all such cases were maintained, and a comprehensive travel history of such patients are required so as to prevent infection from outside to get in a community. Vaccination history also is important, because it is seen that all those persons who were vaccinated from other flaviviruses had some sort of protection. So again, you have the MAC ELISA, IgM and all. No need to go into detail of all. Just remember that MAC ELISA can be done in any of the flaviviruses. Okay. Again, you have culture of these viruses in different cell lines. Cell lines are not easy to maintain, and therefore routine diagnostic labs do not do them. So in India, who is doing the test? That is the NCDC and the NIB. These two centers are the ones which are apex institute and which are able to identify these outbreaks if such cases come. There are certain other laboratories which are designated by ICMR, and the ideal method of testing is RT-PCR. There is no commercial kit available for Zika virus disease testing, and there is no serological test which is recommended in India. So the main method of detection is RT-PCR, and it is because it is not commercially available in any of the private labs and in the hospital setups. You have to send the sample to either NCDC or NIB if you are suspected. There was no specific treatment for Zika infection. Again, you just give supportive therapy, and NSAID, just like any other viral infection. NSAIDs, Brufen and all, you are not supposed to give in dengue, in chikungunya, and even in Zika, because they are supposed to cause or increased risk in hemorrhage. Okay. Now, some of the vaccines which are in pipeline for these Zika infections are these. So lots of vaccines are come out of it yet. There are guidelines for Zika do's and don'ts, just like any other viral infection, like personal protection. You have to prevent yourself from mosquito bite, and prevent the propagation of mosquitoes in your surroundings, control mosquito breeding. The control strategies are best. You will be best taught in PSM, but are the all different type of mosquito control method like chemical, mechanical, and biological and genetic types. So I'm going to skip this. So just a reminder that all these infections will have a presentation at start, and anything beyond that you have to identify as per your clinical judgment. Only a diagnostic method will not suffice. You have to have strong clinical judgment of such infection, and you have to report. If you don't report such infections, control measures cannot be done. If you don't report, then these infection will be transmitted from one person to another. So if you are suspecting such infection, you must report these infections to the authorities. Any other query regarding this lecture can be sent to me. I will share my email with your class reps.